Story number 1. The Dinner Table. Marcus Webb had been driving for UPS for 11 years, and in 11 years he had learned exactly one rule that mattered above all the others. Never linger. Drop the package, scan it, leave. The people who lingered were the people who came back to the depot with stories, and Marcus had no interest in stories. He had a route to finish. He had 412 deliveries behind him, and 22 still ahead when he turned off Highway 9 onto Cooperfield Road in rural Bledsoe County, Tennessee. On the afternoon of October 14, 2022, the farmhouse at the end of Cooperfield Road sat 7/10 of a mile from the nearest paved surface. The driveway was gravel and dirt, packed hard from what looked like decades of use, flanked on both sides by dead cornfields that had not been harvested in at least 2 seasons. The stalks were black, not brown the way corn goes when it dries, but genuinely black, the color of something scorched, and they stood perfectly upright in the flat October light without moving. Even though Marcus could feel wind rocking his truck as he drove in, he noticed the stalks were not moving. He told himself that was because they were dead and stiff. He told himself that for the full 7/10 of a mile, the house was a 2-story white clapboard structure, old but maintained, with a covered porch running the full width of the front face. A green Dodge Ram sat in the gravel beside the house, and an older Buick sedan was parked behind it. 2 cars. People home. Marcus pulled up, grabbed the package from the shelf behind his seat, a medium-sized box, 18 pounds, center listed as a medical supply company in Memphis, and walked to the front door with his scanner. He knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, harder this time. 3 solid impacts that rattled the aluminum storm door in its frame. Still nothing. He shifted the package to his left arm and pressed his face to the narrow strip of glass beside the door frame that some old farmhouses have instead of a proper sidelight. He expected to see a dim hallway, maybe a coat rack, the kind of domestically boring entry corridor he had seen 10,000 times in 11 years of deliveries. What he saw instead made the package drop 6 inches in his grip before his fingers clenched back down on it by reflex. The front room of the house opened directly into a dining room, and there was a family seated at the table. A man, a woman, and 2 children, a boy and a girl. The children maybe 8 and 10 years old. They were seated in the 4 chairs around the table. There was food in front of them, steaming food. Plates piled with what looked like mashed potatoes and green beans and a roast of some kind, the steam rising in slow curls toward the low ceiling of the room. None of them were moving, not slightly, not the way people move when they're simply sitting still, the imperceptible micro-movements of breathing, of shifting weight, of living. They were stationary in the way that furniture is stationary. The father's fork was raised halfway to his mouth, and it was not moving. The mother's head was bowed slightly over her plate, and her hair, dark and straight, hung at an angle that suggested a movement that had simply stopped. The girl had her hand on her glass of milk, and the milk had not spilled, and her elbow was at a 45-degree angle, and none of it was moving. Marcus stood at that glass strip for 4 full seconds before his brain produced a coherent thought, and the thought was, they can't hear me. Maybe they are hard of hearing. Maybe they are absorbed in a conversation he couldn't see or hear. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for why 4 people were frozen mid-meal, like a photograph of themselves. He knocked again, louder, flat-palmed against the aluminum door so it made a booming rattle he was certain could be heard from the next county. The family did not react. He tried the doorbell. A faint electric chime sounded from somewhere deep in the house. He could hear it clearly from where he stood. The family at the table did not flinch. Marcus stood on that porch for a moment, breathing through his nose, feeling the October air on the back of his neck, trying to reason his way through what he was seeing. He had delivered to this address 3 times before, according to his scanner history. 3 previous deliveries in the past 14 months. He had never met the residents. Each of the previous 3 deliveries had been left at the door with a delivery notice. He knew nothing about who lived here except their name on the shipping label, R. Hartwell. He scanned the package as an attempted delivery, printed the door tag, stuck it to the storm door handle, and placed the package against the door. That was the job. He had done the job. He walked back to his truck, climbed in, and started down the gravel drive. He had gone perhaps 200 yards when he checked his mirror. It was a habit he had developed without realizing it over 11 years. Check the mirror as you leave. Make sure the package is still where you left it. Make sure nobody ran out too late to catch you. A meaningless habit. Reflexive. 4 people were standing at the end of the covered porch, side by side, watching him drive away. All 4 of them. The man, the woman, the boy, the girl, standing in a line, perfectly still, perfectly aligned with each other, their arms at their sides. At that distance, he could not make out their faces. He could not tell if they were looking at him specifically or simply in his direction. The girl still had her hand raised slightly, as if she were still holding the glass of milk that was now inside the house, 40 feet behind them. Marcus did not stop the truck. He drove to the end of Cooperfield Road, turned onto Highway 9, and drove at 47 miles per hour for the next 6 minutes without touching his radio or his phone or his energy drink. He drove in absolute silence with both hands on the wheel and both eyes on the road ahead, because something in the base of his skull had decided without consulting the rest of him that looking in the mirror again was not something he was willing to do. He filed the delivery in his system. He continued his route. He finished at 6:43 p.m. and drove back to the depot in Dayton, Tennessee, where he turned in his truck and filled out his end-of-shift paperwork without mentioning what he had seen. He told himself there was an explanation, a medical condition maybe, a sleep disorder, some kind of cataplexy that froze the whole family mid-motion, a synchronized prank, something. He cataloged his explanations the way you stack sandbags against a flood, and for about 3 days the sandbags held. On the 4th day, he looked up the address. The property at the end of Cooperfield Road in Bledsoe County was listed in the county assessor's database as belonging to an estate, the estate of Raymond Hartwell, deceased, who had passed away on March 3, 2019. The property had not been transferred, sold, or otherwise conveyed since that date. The estate had no active administrator listed. There were no utility accounts attached to the address, no electric service, no water service, municipal or private well registration. Marcus sat with that information for a long time. There was food steaming on that table. Steam requires heat. Heat requires an energy source. No electrical service meant no electric stove, no microwave. It was possible, he told himself, to use a wood-burning stove or a propane range off the grid. Possible. People did it. That was possible. He tried to think about whether he had seen a propane tank beside the house. He had not. He had not seen a woodpile either. What he had seen were 2 cars, a green Ram and a Buick, both of which he now ran through a basic online search and found registered to Raymond Hartwell, the deceased, with registration dates from 2017 and 2018 respectively. There were no other registered vehicles at that address. He told his wife. He told her on a Thursday night sitting at their own kitchen table, and he watched her face change as he described it, the way her fork lowered slowly to her plate and she stopped chewing and just looked at him. He noticed, he would say later, that for just a moment she was perfectly still. He noticed it, and then he hated himself for noticing it. He requested a route change from his depot manager the following Monday, citing personal reasons. He did not specify the reasons. The manager, a broad-shouldered woman named Dinah, who had been running that depot for 16 years, looked at him for a long moment before she granted the request. She told him he was the 3rd driver to ask off the Bledsoe County rural route in 4 years. He asked her why the others had asked for the change. She said she didn't know. They hadn't told her, but she said it the way you say something when you do know and have decided not to. The package delivered to R. Hartwell on October 14, 2022, the medical supply box for Memphis, 18 pounds, was never returned. Marcus checked his delivery exception reports every week for 6 months. No refused delivery. No return to sender. No one ever called the UPS customer line to report a missed delivery or a non-receipt. Somewhere, somebody received that package. Marcus still delivers. Different county now. Suburban streets with sidewalks and streetlights and neighbors who wave from their lawns. He says he's fine. He says he barely thinks about it anymore. But his wife told a friend of hers who told someone else, who eventually put the story online, that Marcus cannot eat at the dinner table anymore. He takes his meals standing at the kitchen counter with his back to the wall, facing the room. He hasn't told her why. He doesn't need to. Story number 2, her own handwritten. The note on the door was written on a torn piece of brown paper bag, the kind you'd find in any kitchen, and it read, Celeste. Don't knock. Leave it on the steps. That was all. No explanation. No apartment number, because there was no apartment. Just a single house at the end of a dead-end road in rural Cattaraugus County, New York, in the middle of a February that had been trying to kill people since the third week of January. Celeste Okafor read the note twice in the beam of her headlights, standing on the frozen porch with the FedEx package tucked under her arm and her breath fogging in clouds around her head, and she felt the cold climb her spine in a way that had nothing to do with the 17-degree air temperature. Her name was on the note. Not the recipient's name. Not a generic instruction like, deliveries leave on steps. Her name. Celeste. The name on her FedEx badge, yes, but also just her name, a name that nobody at this address should have known, because she had never delivered here before. She had never been on this road before. This delivery was a redirect from another driver's route who had called in sick that morning, and Celeste had not been assigned to it until 9:45 a.m. on February 7th, 2023. She turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. She held it under her headlight and looked at the handwriting again. It took her a moment, the way recognizing something deeply familiar but deeply wrong takes a moment, because your brain has to first accept the impossible before it can process the implications. The handwriting was hers, not similar to hers, not the same general style. Hers, specifically, the way she made the capital C with the small upward serif at the end, the way she connected the T to the E without lifting her pen, the way the L sat slightly taller than the rest of the letters around it. 17 years of writing her own name on documents and birthday cards and FedEx manifests, and she knew her own handwriting the way she knew her own face. Someone had written this note in her handwriting. She stood on the porch of a house she had never visited and held a note written in her own hand and felt the ground shift slightly beneath her feet, not physically, but in the way that certainty shifts when it cracks. She was a rational person. She was 34 years old. She had a degree in logistics management. She had driven for FedEx for 6 years, and she was a rational person who did not entertain nonsense. She put the package on the steps. She got back in her truck. She drove. The road that had brought her here was a dead end. She knew that because her GPS had told her so, because she had seen the dead end sign at the road's entrance 8/10 of a mile back, and because she had turned around in this very driveway to point her truck back toward the road. She drove 8/10 of a mile, and the road did not end. It continued, not in any dramatic way. There was no sudden new scenery, no fork, no change in the road surface. The dead-end sign was simply no longer there, and the road simply continued forward into a darkness that her headlights pushed 40 feet into and no further. She drove another quarter-mile expecting to see the intersection with County Road 12 that she had turned off of to get here. The intersection did not appear. She pulled over and checked her GPS. The unit showed her on County Road 12 already. According to the screen, she was moving northwest on County Road 12 at 22 miles per hour. The road she was actually driving, the road under her tires right now, was unlabeled on the GPS map, a thin gray line that led off the edge of the displayed area. She turned around. She drove back the way she had come. After 6/10 of a mile, she passed the house again. The same house. The same dead-end road. The same frozen porch. The same package sitting on the steps where she had left it. The note was gone. Celeste stopped the truck and sat with the engine running and the heater blowing and stared at the porch. The package was there. She could see her own footprints in the thin skim of ice on the porch boards, the shape of her boots leading to the door and back. The note she had pulled from the door was in her coat pocket. She could feel it. She pressed her hand against her pocket and felt the folded paper bag corner crinkle under her palm. But the note holder, The thumbtack that had fixed it to the door was gone. The small hole it had left in the wood was gone too. The door looked as if nothing had ever been pinned to it. She took out her phone and called her dispatcher. The call connected. She could hear the ambient noise of the depot, the voices, the conveyor system running, the perfectly mundane sounds of a FedEx depot at 10:45 in the morning. She told the dispatcher where she was. She gave her the address. The dispatcher looked it up and then was quiet for a moment. The dispatcher said, "Celeste, that delivery was completed at 9:50 this morning." Celeste said, "By who?" The dispatcher said, "By you. It's in the system. Your scanner ID. Package delivered at 9:51 a.m." It was now 10:47 a.m. Celeste had left the depot at 9:45. It took 38 minutes to drive to this location. She had arrived at approximately 10:23. She was certain of this. She had checked the time on her phone when she turned off County Road 12. None of those numbers produced a delivery at 9:51 a.m. She sat in the truck and looked at the house and tried to find the seam in reality where it had torn. The windows of the house reflected her headlights back at her flatly. No lights on inside, no sign of movement. She noticed for the first time that the front windows were not windows. She had assumed they were windows from the road. But now, at this distance, in this light, she could see that they were painted onto the exterior of the house, painted with the suggestion of curtains and a room beyond, painted with such skill that from a distance they passed for real glass and real depth. They were flat. The entire front face of the house was flat in a way that houses are not flat, and she understood with a certainty she could not logically justify that the front of this house was a facade, a face presented to the road, and that whatever was behind it bore no relationship to what that face suggested. She drove forward and kept driving and did not turn around. After 2 miles, the road became County Road 12 again, and she could see the lights of Ellicottville in the distance, and she drove toward them at 60 miles per hour with her hands locked to the wheel. She pulled the note from her pocket at a red light in town. She read her own handwriting again. She turned the paper over for the second time. On the back, in the same handwriting, were 11 words that had not been there before. "You weren't supposed to see it from the front. Come back." She did not go back. She could FedEx 4 days later. She moved from Cattaraugus County back to her parents' home in Buffalo. She sees a therapist now, a woman who specializes in trauma and who has, by Celeste's account, never once questioned whether the story is true. The therapist simply asks Celeste how she feels when she thinks about the handwriting. Celeste says it doesn't bother her anymore. She says it casually, the way you say something while looking just slightly to the side of the person you're saying it to. She has not written her own name down in 16 months. Not on a birthday card, not on a form, not on anything. When she has to sign something, she makes a mark that looks like the first letter of her name and then trails off into nothing, a gesture that satisfies the legal requirement of a signature while remaining completely unlike herself. She says she is just trying to develop a new signature, something more professional. Her mother says Celeste looks at her own hands sometimes, in the middle of meals or conversations, and goes very still, just staring at her fingers with an expression her mother cannot name, and then she looks up and continues whatever she was doing as though nothing happened. The house on that dead-end road in Cattaraugus County is not in any property database. The county assessor has no record of a structure at that address. The road itself, the dead end, is on older county maps from the 1980s, but does not appear on any digital map currently. The FedEx delivery record from February 7th that he says, 2023, shows a package delivered at 9:51 a.m. to that address by Celeste Okafor, scanner ID confirmed. No one has been able to explain how she delivered a package 32 minutes before she left the depot. Story number 3. The face in the glass. The thing that bothered Devin Marsh most afterward was not that he had seen it. It was that it had been watching him the whole time, and he hadn't known. He had stood on that porch and knocked on that door and scanned his package and been utterly, completely unaware that something on the other side of the frosted glass was studying him with an attention he would have found unbearable if he'd understood it. The idea of that made his skin feel wrong, like something had been wearing his skin without his permission, like he had been borrowed. He'd been an Amazon delivery driver for 14 months when it happened, working out of the distribution center off Route 1 in Saugus, Massachusetts, on a residential route that covered parts of Lynn and Nahant and the western edge of Swampscott. It was a November route in a November mood. Low gray sky pressing down on the world, bare trees, the particular flat quality of New England light in the weeks before the season fully commits to winter. He had done this route 63 times, give or take, and he knew every driveway, every cranky mailbox, every dog that felt personally insulted by package delivery as a concept. He did not know the house at 17 Renfrew Lane because 17 Renfrew Lane had not been on his route before November 18th, 2021. It was a straightforward addition, a new account, a blue colonial set back from the lane about 40 feet, paved driveway, one visible car under a weathered porta-port shelter to the side. The package was a small one, under 4 pounds, sender a home goods retailer in Ohio. Devin pulled up, grabbed the box, walked to the front door. The front door of the house had a frosted glass panel, full length running down the right side of the doorframe. Decorative, common in older Massachusetts colonials, a design element from an era that valued natural light in entry halls. The glass was the heavy, pebbled kind that turns shapes into suggestions. You could see light and movement through it, but not detail, not features, not anything you could hold in your mind and call a face. But there was someone standing on the other side of it. Devin could see the silhouette, a person-shaped darkness behind the pebbled glass, standing at the door at full height, arms slightly away from the body. Someone who had heard him come up the walk, who had come to the door and was standing right there, ready to receive the package. Perfect. Great. This was the ideal delivery scenario. He knocked. The silhouette did not move. He said, "Amazon delivery," because sometimes people needed the auditory confirmation before they'd open the door, some anxiety about answering without knowing, and the silhouette did not move. He knocked again. Nothing. He tried the doorbell. A ring sounded inside the house, clearly audible from the porch. The silhouette stood exactly where it had been standing and did not move in any way at all. Devin leaned slightly to the left to look through the glass from a marginally different angle. The figure was still there, standing approximately 3 feet from the door, facing the door. Its shape that of an adult human being of middling height with arms hanging at its sides. He stood on the porch for another 40 seconds, knocking twice more, calling out once more, receiving no response of any kind. And then he did what the training said to do when no one answers a door at which someone is clearly present. But refusing to open, he leaned the package against the door, took his confirmation photograph and left. He noted in the delivery comments field, "Resident visible through door glass, unresponsive." He submitted it. He moved on. He had 3 more deliveries on Renfrew Lane, and then he was done with the street. He was back in his van, updating his route completion on the tablet, when the dashcam notification chimed on his phone. The Amazon Flex app had a feature that saved the last 60 seconds of dashcam footage anytime a driver was stationary for more than 2 minutes. He'd been stationary in the driveway of 17 Renfrew Lane for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The app had saved the footage automatically. He wouldn't normally have looked at it. He had plenty of deliveries left. But the notification had appeared and his thumb found it before his brain fully engaged. The footage showed the front of the house from the driveway angle. He watched himself walk to the door with the package. He watched himself knock. He watched himself look at the frosted glass panel. The person behind the glass was clearly visible even through the dashcam's resolution. The silhouette, person-shaped, standing at the door. He watched himself knock a second time. He watched himself ring the bell. He watched the figure behind the glass turn. Not turn to face the door. It had been facing the door. It turned away from the door, rotating 180 degrees in a smooth, unhurried motion, so that it was now facing into the house instead of toward him. In turning, it presented what should have been the back of a human head toward the glass. The glass showed the front of a human face. The figure had turned around, but what was visible to the glass, the part of the figure facing Devin now, was still a face, still forward-facing. The silhouette had rotated, but its face had not, or the face had remained pressed to the glass while the body turned away from it. He could not be certain which, because the frosted glass reduced everything to a suggestion, but what the suggestion showed was unambiguous. A face pressed against the glass from the inside, looking out at him, while the body it was attached to faced the opposite direction. Devin watched this for 11 seconds before the figure moved again. It walked away from the door, deeper into the house, and disappeared from the panel. Devin sat in his van outside 17 Renfrew Lane and watched the footage 3 more times. Then he watched it a 4th time, his thumb leaving a smear of sweat across the screen. The face in the glass had no features. He had convinced himself, watching the first time, that the glass was simply too pebbled, too distorted to show features. That made sense. That was the explanation. But on the second viewing, and the third and the fourth, he looked at the area of the silhouette's face the way you look at something you don't want to confirm, with your eyes slightly unfocused, like you're trying to see a magic eye image, and what he saw was skin. A smooth, unbroken expanse of skin-colored suggestion where the eyes and nose and mouth should have been, the glass warping it, but not hiding it. The pebbled distortion not creating those missing features, but instead accurately reflecting the absence of them. He drove to his next delivery. He did not call the homeowner. He did not file a formal report. He did not call the police. He drove to his next delivery because the training had covered a lot of scenarios, and this was not one of them. And when your training doesn't cover a scenario, your body tends to find something it does know how to do and does that instead. He mentioned it to another driver at the depot that evening, a woman named Priscilla, who had been on the route 2 years longer than him. He described it as casually as he could manage. The figure, the glass, the face with no features. Priscilla listened without interrupting him. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Renfrew Lane, number 17? He said yes. She said she delivered there 4 times. She said each time she had seen the figure in the glass. Each time the figure had been standing at the door when she arrived. She had never seen it turn. She said she was glad she hadn't. She said there was something she needed to tell him, and the thing she told him was this. The 3rd time she delivered to that address, she had looked it up on her phone that evening. The address, the people, whatever she could find. What she found was a court document from 2017, a civil matter, a complaint filed by neighbors about a resident of 17 Renfrew Lane named Thomas Geary, who had allegedly been entering neighboring properties at night. The complaint included the testimony of a woman 3 doors down who said she had seen Geary standing in her backyard at 3 in the morning, standing completely still, facing her back door. She had turned on her porch light. She wrote in the complaint that when the light came on, Geary had turned to look at her. She wrote that his face in the porch light from 30 feet away had looked wrong in a way she could not explain. She wrote that it looked like the face of someone who had seen what a face should look like, and had done their best to approximate it without full success. Thomas Geary still lived at 17 Renfrew Lane. Devin transferred routes the following week. The house is still on the delivery rotation. There is no note on the address in the system, no warning, no flag. Drivers go there. Packages get delivered. The figure stands at the door. How many times, Devin wonders on the bad nights, has it watched him from somewhere else? Not through a frosted glass panel with a warning. Just watching, just standing somewhere behind a window he passed without thinking about. In a neighborhood he drove through 100 times, its face pressed to the glass in a room he happened not to be looking at. How many times have any of us walked past a window like that? Story number 4. The house on the vacant lot. Reina Castellano was not supposed to be working that Friday night, and she knew it, and she had agreed to the extra shift anyway, because her radiator had developed a leak, and car repairs wait for no one, and that is the kind of decision that seems completely reasonable right up until the moment it isn't. She had been delivering for Mama Lucia's pizzeria in Missoula, Montana for 2 years. She knew Missoula. She had grown up in Missoula. She knew every neighborhood, every shortcut, every house in the delivery radius. And she was absolutely certain of one thing when her GPS brought her to the end of Wicker Street. On the night of September 9th, 2022, there was no house at 414 Wicker Street. There had never been a house at 414 Wicker Street. The lot had been empty since she was a child. She had ridden her bike past it as a girl. She had driven past it 600 times in the 2 years she'd worked for Mama Lucia's, because Wicker Street was a through route she used to cut between Rattlesnake and Grand Creek, and she had never once looked at that lot and seen anything other than the chain-link fence and the overgrown grass and the concrete foundation slab that sat in the middle of it from some structure long demolished. But the GPS said 414 Wicker Street, and at 414 Wicker Street, in the full gold wash of porch lights and interior lights that spilled through curtain windows, was a house in every sense of the word, a house that looked the way houses look when people live in them, well, and care about them. The porch swept, the window boxes planted even in September, with late-season mums in yellow and rust, a welcome mat in front of the door with a pattern of fall leaves, a Ford Explorer in the driveway, dark green, recent model. The smell of someone's fireplace somewhere near, that good October smell of wood smoke and cold air. Raina sat in her car for 45 seconds with 2 pizzas getting cold on the passenger seat. The lot had been empty this morning. She had driven past it this morning. She drove past it every morning. She got out of the car. The walk from the driveway to the front door was flagstone, well-maintained, lit by 2 solar lanterns on either side that gave off warm amber light. She stood on the welcome mat and knocked. She heard footsteps inside almost immediately, the comfortable, unhurried footsteps of a person in their own home who had been expecting someone. The door opened. The man who answered was ordinary in a way that felt studied. 50, perhaps. Gray at the temples, wire-rimmed glasses, a flannel shirt over a thermal undershirt, wool socks on his feet. He had the particular ease of someone standing in a doorway they own in a house they know, and he smiled at Raina with the warm, distracted smile of a man whose attention was still partly somewhere else, partly on whatever he'd been doing before the door knocked. He said, finally, "We were starving." He held out cash. Exact amount plus a $3 tip. The bills unfolded and counted, as though he had prepared it in advance. She handed him the 2 boxes. He took them in both hands, looked briefly at the receipt stickered to the top box, and said without looking up, "You tell Mike I said his marinara has been better. He knows what I mean." Then he closed the door. Raina stood on the welcome mat for 3 seconds. She walked back to her car. She drove away. She looked in her rearview mirror at the corner of Wicker Street, where it met the cross street, and the house was still there, its warm windows visible, a completely ordinary house on what had been an empty lot. She went back to Mama Lucia's and told Mike, the owner, what had happened. She told him the address. She told him about the house. She told him what the man had said, the marinara comment. Mike was quiet. He looked at the order on his system. He said, "That order came in from our landline." She said, "Customers don't call on your landline." He said, "No." His landline was a phone mounted to the wall in the kitchen. It received incoming calls from the supplier, from the health department, from the landlord. Nobody had the number except people who had business with the kitchen directly. It was not listed anywhere. It was not posted in the restaurant. A customer could not have the number unless a Mama Lucia's employee had given it to them. No employee admitted to giving it out. Raina looked up 414 Wicker Street when she got home. The Missoula County assessor listed it as an empty parcel. The last structure on the property had been demolished in 1989. The parcel was owned by a holding company in Delaware whose filing agent had a listed address and nothing else. No officers, no registered business activity, just a name on a form. The company name was Hartwell Property Management. She found this notable because she could not say why. The next morning she drove down Wicker Street on her way to work. The lot was empty. Chain-link fence, overgrown grass, concrete foundation slab, cracked in the center along a diagonal line that she had always thought looked like something pressed up against it from underneath. The welcome mat was on the slab. The fall-leaf patterned welcome mat from the house that had been there last night and was not there this morning was sitting in the center of the concrete slab right side up, as if someone had left it there intentionally. She did not stop the car. At work, she told Mike about the welcome mat. Mike listened and then did something Raina did not expect. He unlocked the cabinet under the kitchen landline and showed her what was inside. He'd been putting off throwing it out for years, he said. He didn't know why he'd kept it. It was an old Rolodex, the spinning kind, loaded with contact cards from the early 2000s, when Mama Lucia's had first opened. Mike's father had built the business. These were his father's cards. Mike flipped to the W section and found a card for a Wicker Street address, 414. The card was in his father's handwriting. It said, Hartwell, best customer, generous tipper, likes the marinara as it was. Mike's father had been dead since 2013. Raina quit the following week. She found a job working days at the DMV. Indoors, at a desk, in a building with a fixed address, and walls she could account for, and a parking lot she had crossed so many times it was part of her body. She has not done delivery work of any kind since September of 2022. She thinks about the man's comment sometimes. The marinara comment. You tell Mike I said his marinara has been better. He knows what I mean. She thinks about how ordinary the comment was. How casual. How completely, perfectly ordinary. The way you talk to a delivery driver when you're a regular, when you know the place, when you have a relationship with the kitchen that goes back years. She thinks about how long you would have to be ordering from the same restaurant, from the same kitchen, to feel that familiar. She thinks about the card in the Rolodex, likes the marinara as it was, past tense, as it was when the restaurant first opened, before the recipe changed. Before Mike's father died, before any of the things that had changed, as it was in 2002. 20 years of pizzas delivered to a house that does not exist to a man who looks the same age he has always been, whatever age that is. 20 years of perfect tips and exact change. Raina locks her doors at night now, all of them. The deadbolt and the chain and the sliding bar lock on the back door. She doesn't live on Wicker Street. She never has. There is no logical reason to believe the locks matter. She puts them on anyway. Story number 5. The Patience. Joel Travers had the kind of face that inspired trust, which was why a supervisor at Cascade Medical Logistics kept assigning him the solo runs. Joel was 28 years old, ex-Army, punctual, non-confrontational, and he had driven temperature-sensitive pharmaceutical deliveries through every corner of the Pacific Northwest for 3 years without a single incident report. His supervisor called him reliable. His coworkers called him unflappable. Both words meant the same thing. Joel did not rattle. After October 3, 2023, Joel never said those words about himself again. The delivery was routed to Harkin Falls Behavioral Health Center, a licensed inpatient psychiatric facility in Grays Harbor County, Washington, on a 2-lane state road 17 miles from Aberdeen. The cargo was a pallet of temperature-controlled medications, antipsychotics and mood stabilizers, and the 24 smaller related pharmaceuticals that a functioning psychiatric facility requires to function. Joel had delivered to Harkin Falls twice before. He knew the facility. He knew the receiving entrance on the east side of the building, the bay door, the key code for the personnel entrance beside it when the bay was closed. He had the facility contacts number in his phone. He called ahead at 6:45 p.m. as standard procedure required. The call went to voicemail. He left a message. He called the facility's main line. He got a recorded greeting that said calls received after 5 p.m. would be returned the next business day, which was normal. Administrative staff did not run the overnight. The clinical staff did, and the clinical staff used a different line, the emergency receiving line that was posted on his manifest. He called the emergency receiving line. It rang 17 times and went to voicemail. He drove to the facility. Harkin Falls Behavioral Health Center was a 2-story concrete block structure built in the 1970s, when psychiatric architecture believed strongly in the therapeutic value of windowlessness, and it sat at the end of a long paved drive surrounded by Douglas firs that blocked the road from view. The building was lit, every exterior light on, which was normal. The parking lot had 2 vehicles in it, both white, both service vehicles, a maintenance van, and something that might have been a facility transport. Joel pulled to the receiving bay. The bay door was down. He tried the key code for the personnel entrance. It worked. The door clicked open. He stood in the doorway and called out, "Cascade Medical, I've got the Tuesday delivery." No response. He was not technically supposed to enter the facility unaccompanied. His manifest was clear on that, a weight escort from receiving staff. But the medications on his pallet included insulin analogs and a controlled substance Tier 2 compound that required chain of custody signature. And he had been calling ahead for 45 minutes with no response. And the medications could not be returned to the depot without a documented refusal form signed by a facility administrator. And there was no administrator answering. And the medications had a temperature window of 6 hours from loading, and he had used 3 of those hours driving out here. He propped the door and went back for the hand truck. The receiving corridor of Harkin Falls was a long fluorescent hallway with a painted concrete floor and the particular smell of industrial cleaning products and something underneath the cleaning. Products that Joel associated from his army days with field hospitals. Not blood, not exactly, but the vegetative, slightly fermented smell of human bodies concentrated in an enclosed space. The lights were on. The corridor was empty. He wheeled the pallet in, left it at the receiving station, and went to find someone with signing authority. The main corridor was to the left through a set of double doors. The doors were propped open. The main corridor of Harkin Falls Behavioral Health Center was dark. Every overhead light in the corridor was off. The only illumination came from the emergency lighting strips at floor level. Those thin green lines that airports and hospitals install so that people can navigate in an evacuation. And in their light, the corridor was rendered in a flat, gray-green monochrome that turned everything the color of deep water. The patients were in the corridor. Joel counted 32 of them. They were seated in wheelchairs, both sides of the corridor, in a single file on each side, facing the same direction, facing the double doors he had just come through, facing him, all 32 of them. Men and women of varying ages in facility gowns and facility socks, in the wheelchairs that a facility like this would have. The utilitarian chrome ones with black vinyl seats, and they were seated in those wheelchairs, and they were facing him, and they were breathing. He could hear it. The collective rhythm of 32 people breathing in the near dark, in and out, synchronized, one breath, one shared exhalation that made the air in the corridor move slightly, enough to feel on his face, a slow pulse of breath rolling toward him and then pulling back. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them moved. 32 people in wheelchairs in a darkened corridor, in perfect alignment, breathing in perfect rhythm, watching him with the flat green emergency light throwing shadows up their faces from below, and not one of them doing anything other than breathing and watching. Joel stood in the doorway for a long moment. He said, "Hello?" The breathing continued. He said, "I'm from Cascade Medical. I have a delivery. Is there a staff member I can speak with?" One of the patients, a man in the front of the left file, perhaps 60 years old, his head shaved, his hands folded in his lap with the precision of someone who had folded them that way 1,000 times, turned to look at him, not his whole body, his head, rotating on his neck with the slow deliberateness of a security camera completing a sweep until his eyes were on Joel's face. The green emergency lighting turned his eyes into dark hollows. He said, "You're late." Joel said, "I'm sorry." The man said, "The Tuesday delivery. You're late. We've been waiting since 5. He said it the way you say something that has been true for a long time and is simply a fact now. The way you say it when the frustration has been fully processed and left behind and only the statement remains. Joel said, "Is there a staff member I can get to sign for the—" "There's no one here tonight," the man said. "There's only us." Joel did not ask what that meant. He did not ask where the staff were, why 32 patients were in the corridor in the dark, why they were all facing the same direction, why they were breathing together. He did not ask, because the part of his brain that assessed situations and determined threats had been running since the moment he came through the double doors, and it had reached a conclusion without words, a conclusion that expressed itself only as pressure, as a hot rising pressure behind his sternum that said, "Do not ask anything, do not stay." He walked backward through the double doors. He went down the receiving corridor. He stepped over his own hand truck. He went out the personnel entrance. He got in his truck. He drove to the end of the facility driveway, to the point where it met the state road, and he stopped there for 30 seconds in the dark under the Douglas firs. Because his hands were shaking too badly to safely turn, he left without the signed manifest. He called his supervisor from the state road. His supervisor was asleep. He left a voicemail. He drove back to Aberdeen and sat in the 24-hour diner on the main strip and drank coffee until his hands stopped shaking, which took 50 minutes. He filed an incident report the next morning. His supervisor called Harkin Falls Behavioral Health Center that morning to discuss the failed chain of custody delivery. Harkin Falls Behavioral Health Center had been closed for renovation since September 1, 2023. The facility had been empty for 33 days. All patients had been transferred to a sister facility in Olympia. All staff had been reassigned. The building was under contract with a renovation company that worked daytime hours only. At 6:45 p.m. on October 3rd, there had been no one in that building. No staff. No patients. The renovation company confirmed they had not been on site after 4 p.m. The key code for the personnel entrance had been changed on September 1st when the facility locked down. Joel's code had still worked. He has not been able to explain that. He drives a different route now, daytime only, urban areas, no facilities. He requested the reassignment by telling his supervisor he was concerned about the solo overnight format from a safety standpoint. His supervisor agreed it made sense. Routine reassignment, no issue. What he did not tell his supervisor, what he has not told anyone completely except one person who had no reason to disbelieve him, was the last thing he saw before he went through the double doors. As he backed out of the corridor, as the double doors were swinging shut between him and the 32 wheelchairs, he looked back through the narrowing gap. All 32 patients had turned their heads to watch him go. All 32. Simultaneous, slow. The way the first one had turned, and in the last second before the doors closed, in the green emergency light, he saw their mouths all open at once. Not to speak, not to make any sound he could hear, just open. 32 open mouths in the dark. He does not sleep well. He says he is working on it. Story number 6. What's behind the door? Miriam Ostroff had been a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service for 19 years, which meant she had delivered to the house at 42 Alderman Court in Harlan, Kentucky, approximately 4,938 times. She knew the house the way she knew the contours of her own commute. Automatically, unconsciously, the way your hands know a steering wheel they've held for 2 decades. She knew that the mailbox was 3 inches lower than the standard height, and you had to angle the mail slightly downward to get it in without jamming. She knew that the box had a tendency to rust shut in late winter, and that she had to give the door a particular sideways knock to open it. She knew that the box received consistently 2 magazines, a water bill, a municipal property tax statement, an assortment of credit card offers, and occasional personal correspondence in handwriting she recognized as elderly and careful. In 19 years, she had never seen anyone enter or leave that house, not once. Not in any season, at any hour that her route passed that address, which was always between 10:45 and 11:15 in the morning depending on volume, 5 days a week, every week except federal holidays. She had thought about it over the years, the way you think about a small puzzle that sits on the edge of your mind, mildly, distractedly, without any urgency. The residents could work unusual hours. They could have health issues that kept them inside. They could use a back entrance she couldn't see from the route. There were reasonable explanations. She had parked them in a corner of her mind under the heading, "Probably fine." It was the certified letter that changed things. On March 8, 2023, she came to 42 Alderman Court with a certified letter, restricted delivery, requiring a physical signature from the addressee. The name on the letter was Evangeline Moores. Miriam had seen that name on mail for 19 years and had formed a vague mental image of Evangeline Moores, elderly, probably, careful with her correspondence, a woman of stable and simple habits. She knocked on the door. The door opened, not after a pause. The door opened the way doors open when no one opens them, the latch releasing without drama, the door swinging back on its hinges with a gentle, even arc, as though the air pressure inside the house had equalized with the outside and the door had simply followed. The entry hall was dark. Not the kind of dark you get in a closed house on a cloudy day, where your eyes adjust after a moment and objects become visible. This was a thick, dark, a material dark, the kind of dark that seems to resist light at the edges, and the smell hit Miriam before she had fully processed anything else like paper, not the pleasant, musty smell of old books. A newer smell. Ink and fresh paper and the particular chemical smell of documents, of forms, of official correspondence. She called. Postal Service. I have a certified letter for Evangeline Morse. I need a signature. From somewhere in the darkness, she could not tell how far back, the hall seemed to extend further than the exterior of the house suggested was possible. She heard a sound, movement, not footsteps. A different sound, like paper sliding across a flat surface. Like the sound of very large stacks of paper being shifted. Miriam stood in the open doorway and looked into the hall and let her eyes adjust. The walls were covered in mail, not hung, not framed, wallpapered, floor to ceiling on both visible walls of the entry hall. Every surface covered in overlapping envelopes and papers and parcels. Some open, some sealed, all sorted into what looked, even in the dark, like a deliberate order. Thousands of pieces of mail, layered like geological strata, the newer pieces on top, the older ones buried beneath until they merged with the wall itself, and she could not tell where the mail ended and the plaster began. She recognized some of the envelopes, the credit card offers, the magazines, the water bills. 23 years of water bills. She was looking at 23 years of Evangeline Moore's mail, and none of it had ever been opened. All of it had been brought inside and placed on these walls, sealed, in order, in a collection that served no purpose she could identify. The sound of shifting paper came again. Closer, Miriam held the certified letter out over the threshold, not stepping in, just extending her arm, and said, Miss Morse, I need a signature. Can you come to the door? She said it professionally. She said it with the composure of 19 years. She said it while every nerve in her body was reading the interior of that dark hallway and translating what it found into a language that had no words, only temperature, only the sensation of cold rising from somewhere below her, and the certainty, absolute and reasonless and real, that the thing moving in that hall toward the sound of her voice was not Evangeline Moore's, had never been Evangeline Moore's, had received Evangeline Moore's mail for 23 years in Evangeline Moore's name with the patience of something that understood human bureaucracy from the outside, that understood how to maintain a presence in a system by receiving mail and paying a water bill and existing as a name in a database, without ever needing to be a person. She withdrew her arm. She stepped back. She pulled the door shut by the brass knocker, pulling it rather than letting it swing. The brass cold in her hand in a way that metal in a heated entry hall should not be cold. She wrote on the certified letter form, recipient unavailable. She put it back in her bag. She walked to the next house on the route. She has never spoken about what she smelled underneath the paper smell. The other smell, the one that was there when the door first opened, before the paper smell took over. Her daughter, who heard this story secondhand from Miriam's co-worker at a retirement party, describes it this way. Miriam said it smelled like a house that had not had a living thing inside it in a very long time, not an empty house. Something different from an empty house. A house that had something inside it that was not alive, and the thing that was not alive had been collecting the evidence of a life for 23 years, with a dedication and a patience that Miriam could not think about for more than a few seconds at a hall. Time. Miriam retired from the Postal Service on April 1st, 2023, 24 days after the delivery to 42 Alderman Court. She did not finish out the month. She did not hold a retirement party. She cleaned out her locker on a Tuesday afternoon and turned in her vehicle key and her scanner and walked to her car and drove home. The certified letter is still in the Harlan Post Office's held mail drawer, waiting for a signature that has not come. It will stay there for 30 days before being returned to sender. The sender is listed as the Social Security Administration, Benefits Office, Louisville, Kentucky. Miriam has not wanted to think too hard about what kind of letter the Social Security Administration sends by certified mail, or to whom. Story number 7. The photograph each atch. Dominic Farrell and his partner Teague O'Brien had been running furniture deliveries for a company called Greenfield Moving and Storage in Columbia, South Carolina, for 7 years and 3 years respectively, and in those years they had seen every category of human domestic situation that exists. They had delivered furniture to hoarders and to people whose empty houses echoed with recent divorce. They had delivered to houses where they suspected the inhabitants were running something the authorities would be interested in, and to houses that were so meticulously perfect they felt like showrooms. They had delivered to grief and to new love and to all the complicated situations in between. The point being, they were not easily unsettled. The delivery on the afternoon of June 17, 2022 was, on its face, completely normal. A full house delivery to a residence at 9 Corwin Drive in a subdivision called Cedarwood Estates, northeast of Columbia. Sectional sofa, dining set, 2-bedroom sets, assorted accent pieces, the full household package. The clients, listed as Mr. and Mrs. A. Wren, had paid in full, arranged a delivery window, and left instructions via email. Key under the mat. Please leave by south entrance when done. Thank you. This happened regularly. Clients who closed on a house and drove down ahead of the delivery truck to set up. Standard. The house at 9 Corn Drive was a 4-bedroom colonial, new construction, freshly painted, the lawn not yet fully seeded, the driveway still bearing the chalk outline of contractor vehicles. Dominic found the key under the mat. They started unloading. The first time one of them noticed something was Teague on the second trip in with a section of the sofa. He said to Dominic on his way through the front door. "You see those pictures in there?" Dominic said. "What pictures?" Teague said. "In the dining room, on the wall." Dominic made his third trip in with a coffee table, set it down in the living room, and walked to the dining room. The dining room had photographs on the wall, 4 of them, in matching frames, hung in a row at eye level. Dominic looked at the first one and felt a slight dissonance, the way you feel when you see something that your brain processes normally on the first pass, and then flags for review on the second. The photograph showed 2 people at what looked like a backyard barbecue. A man in a gray t-shirt, a woman in a sundress. Summerlight, the comfortable informality of a personal snapshot. He looked at the man's face for a moment before he identified what was wrong. The man was Teague, not someone who resembled Teague. Teague. The photograph showed Teague O'Brien, his co-worker of 3 years, a man Dominic knew well enough to identify from a distance. At a barbecue Dominic had no memory of attending and could not place. Teague was laughing in the photograph, his head thrown back, a can of something in his right hand, the casual joy of a man at a summer party. Dominic looked at the second photograph. He was in it, his own face, him, standing on what looked like a front porch. Winter, a coat he recognized as one he had owned 4 years ago and then donated, his hands in his pockets, looking at something off frame with an expression he could not identify because you cannot read your own face in a photograph the same way you read others. But it was his face, his coat, his hands. He did not remember this photograph being taken. He did not know whose porch that was. He called Teague into the dining room. Teague came in, and Dominic pointed at the photographs without saying anything. Teague looked at the first photograph for 5 seconds. He looked at the second. He looked at the third, which showed both of them together at what appeared to be a work site, the kind of parking lot of an industrial area, both in work clothes, facing the camera, both of them in the same frame, together. A photograph that would have required a third person to take. Teague turned to Dominic and said, "This isn't right." They looked at the fourth photograph. The fourth photograph was different in format. Not a casual snapshot, but a longer image, horizontal, as if taken from a distance with a zoom lens, grainy in the way of long-distance photography. It showed a truck, a Greenfield moving and storage truck, their specific truck with the dent in the lower right corner of the rear door that had been there for 2 years. The truck was parked on a street Dominic recognized as being outside his own apartment complex. Because he could see the blue awning of the dry cleaner on the corner, the photograph had been taken from across the street. In the image, Barely visible through the truck's windshield were two people in the cab. It had been taken while they were inside the truck. Someone had been across the street from Dominic's apartment complex with a zoom lens, photographing the truck from the outside. The timestamp in the bottom corner of the photograph read April 3rd, 2022, 2 months ago. Dominic took the photograph down from the wall and looked at the back of the frame. On the white paper backing, in small, neat handwriting, were the words, "This one was hard to get. You move around a lot." Teague was already on his phone. He called the Greenfield dispatcher and asked for the contact number for Mr. and Mrs. A. Wren at 9 Corwin Drive. The dispatcher gave him a cell number. He called it. It rang 4 times, and then a man answered. The man said his name was Andre Wren, and he was on his way back from Myrtle Beach. He and his wife, he'd be in Columbia by 8 tonight. He hoped the delivery was going well. Teague said, "Mr. Wren, the photographs on your dining room wall." The man said, "What photographs? We haven't moved anything into the house yet. We haven't been there since last Thursday." Teague said, "There are photographs on your dining room wall." Silence. The man said, "That's not possible. We haven't moved anything in yet. We closed on that house 9 days ago, and we haven't put a single thing inside it. The walls are completely bare." Completely bare? Teague put the phone on speaker and set it on the dining room table. Both of them stood in the room and looked at the 4 photographs on the wall. The photographs did not cease to be there. Dominic's face looked back at him from the second frame. His old coat, his expression that he still could not read. They looked at every room in the house. The house was not bare. Every room had furniture. Not their furniture. Not the sectional and the dining set they were delivering, but furniture already present. Couches, end tables, lamps, a kitchen table with place settings for 2, beds in both bedrooms with linens, a bookcase in the main bedroom filled with books, with their spines turned inward so the titles weren't visible. A house in every way fully occupied except for the absence of people, and photographs everywhere. Different photographs in different rooms, all in the same matching frames, all showing the same 2 subjects from different angles at different times across what appeared to be years of documentation. All of them were of Dominic and Teague. At work sites, in parking lots, through car windows, in the Greenfield depot, which should not have been accessible to a civilian with a camera, at what was clearly Dominic's apartment, at what was clearly Teague's house, his back garden, a photograph taken through the back fence from the alley. Hundreds of photographs, years of surveillance assembled into a home, a domestic space decorated entirely with evidence of 2 men's lives that those 2 men had not known were being documented. Dominic said later that the worst part was not the photographs. The worst part was the kitchen. On the refrigerator, held by a simple magnet, was a delivery schedule, a printed sheet with dates and addresses. He recognized the format because it was the Greenfield moving and storage delivery schedule format. But the dates listed were all in the future, July through December 2022. 23 scheduled deliveries, names and addresses, all formatted correctly. His name was listed as the delivery driver on every one. The last scheduled delivery on the sheet was December 21st, 2022. The address was 9 Corwin Drive. The client name was listed as A. Wren. That delivery, this delivery, the one they were standing inside, was not on the schedule yet. December 21st was 6 months away. This delivery was today, June 17th. Whoever had put this schedule on the refrigerator had known, 6 months in advance, that Dominic Farrell would stand in this kitchen and read it. They walked out of the house. They put the key back under the mat. They loaded nothing in. They drove back to Columbia in near silence on a June afternoon that was hot and bright and smelled like cut grass. And the normalcy of it did not help at all, because normality had turned out to be a surface, and surfaces Dominic now understood were thin. The Greenfield supervisor called the police. A unit went to 9 Corwin Drive and documented what was inside. The report describes furniture of unknown origin, personal photographs, documents, and a calendar or schedule affixed to refrigerator. The case was opened as a stalking and criminal trespass investigation. It remains open. The person who assembled that house, who lived in it or something like lived in it, who furnished it with evidence of two strangers' lives and hung their faces on the walls, was never identified. Dominic no longer works in delivery. He does not say much about what happened. His sister, who remains close to him, says that the thing that stays with him, the thing he mentioned once and is never mentioned again, is a detail from the bedroom. The main bedroom, the one with the inward-turned books. On the nightstand was an alarm clock, a digital alarm clock, the kind that plugs into the wall. It was set to the right time, which meant someone had set it and the power in the house was live. The alarm was set for a time. He doesn't say what time. He says only that it was set for a time that had not yet occurred when they were in the house. And when his sister asked him what he thought that meant, what they would have woken up to, whoever was meant to wake up to that alarm, in a house decorated with evidence of two men who didn't know they were being watched, Dominic said, "I think we got there before we were supposed to." He has never elaborated on what he thinks would have happened if they hadn't.